Story 1. I flicked on the TV. It was almost time for the news. Static fizzed and buzzed behind the crystal screen. The hairs on my neck stood on end. Goosebumps ran down my thighs. My loins tightened. The bees in the tubes of the television's mind were awoken by their queen, dancing to vitalize their still sleeping wings. One by one, they fell into line, red bees, yellow bees, blue bees. They swarmed frenetically across the screen, took the form of a tiger, slinking through the jungle with a fresh kill in its mouth. I always watched the Flora and Fauna channel before bed. Last night had been a really gripping documentary on monkeys. I liked watching them crawling around, searching for food in a forest of stumps. The narrator called it D4D forced demorsification, something about paper. I liked monkeys, but I liked paper more. Otherwise, what did I have so much of it for? I looked around at the stacks of books strewn around my room. They had belonged to my ex-wife. The only person I missed was my wife, but I never liked her any more than the fellas at work. She couldn't drink beer like they did. The buttons on the remote were made of a soft rubber, skin soft. Pressing them was like pressing against the fatty part of the palm. Sometimes I held the remote to my face, tried to press all the buttons at the same time. I'd watch whatever channel was summoned by this. In the morning, though, I had purpose. I commanded the skin to channel 2, set the volume up to 16. 17 is too loud, Mr. Daly, my nurses told me. Okay, I said. There were 4 short taps on the door, complemented by the jingle of bracelets. It was the other nurse today, the bubbly one, who wore a lot of jewelry. I didn't like her as much. I could never get her name right. The other nurse was quiet, and the men nurses quieter still. But I liked Nurse 2's tea, so she wasn't that bad in my book. The door handle clicked as it opened. The sharp white halogen light of the hallway thundered into the room. Humid funk creeped out. The smell of damp, worm-eaten books caressed Nurse 2's face as she stepped into the room. Synthetic crickets and frogs sang from the night scene playing on Channel 2. The nurse thought of summers foraging for mushrooms in the Everglades. Her hair was big, curly and frizzy. It cascaded haphazardly around her oval face, meeting in a tight part, bisecting her high forehead. Her glasses magnified the freckles on her cheeks. She wore a grey wool scarf around her neck. Dangling beneath the scarf were 3 long necklaces, a pentacle, a purple crystal, and a glass ball of blue, white and black I had seen on Channel 8 one time. "Good morning, Mr. Daly." The sing-song pitch of her voice drew out the middle part of good. She pushed the door open backward, both hands on a serving tray, and continued her dove song, "I've got something special for you today." The night scene on Channel 2 faded to black and cut to commercial. An older couple was smiling, holding hands as they walked down a beach. Close up on the husband, holding a bottle of Vitatin, I followed the disclaimer silently with my mouth. Headaches, sneezing, aching, suicidal thoughts or actions. Nurse 2 tiptoed over the books and set the silver tray down on the table. She pushed the sleeves of her cardigan back up to her elbows, bracelets jangling on both wrists. She smelled like cigarettes. I missed cigarettes. Mario Bertolini used to smoke them in all his old flicks. "No more," implored my doctor. "Okay," I said. Nurse 2 lifted the lid off a small ceramic bowl and selected a golf ball-sized bundle of leaves. She held it up to the light between her index and middle finger and tapped me on the shoulder. Grinning, she warbled, "I made this myself, something I've been working on for quite a while." I glanced at the ball between her fingers briefly. I turned my attention back to the Liberty Electric jingle. "I grew the herbs in my garden. They've been purified in moon water," Nurse 2 went on. "Echinacea root can only be dried during the week of the 5th moon of summer. At least that's what my godmother told me. Did you know that, Mr. Daly?" I grunted, checked the channel guide. 10 minutes until the news. Nurse 2 continued, "This is Chinese flowering tea, Cherie's special blend of jasmine, rose, echinacea, kava kava, elderflower, and a special surprise in the middle." Why's it special? Well, just wait and see. She took the clean, clear mug from the tray and set it in front of her, lowered the ball of herbs carefully into its center. She lifted the kettle, and fingers of steam stroked the air as she held it above the mug. Then slowly, caringly, she poured over the ball until the mug was full. The leaves holding it together broke away slowly, and it bobbed gently as she stuck the mug in front of my face. I was awestruck. Normally this would have been cause for a great outrage, an interruption right at the climax of the Mary Sue baking tin infomercial. But what I saw in the mug before me demanded my attention. I held it and watched the herbs carefully. One leaf unfurled, and then two, slowly, but all at once, the bundle came apart, blossoming before my eyes. The brown exterior revealed a blue lotus flower. It danced around the water before settling at the bottom of the mug. Almost immediately the water tinted purple, and steeping more, the lotus was almost obscured entirely by the rich shade of plum. An earthy aroma with tones of tulips and butterscotch wafted in warmth through my nostrils and past my ears. I could feel the steam bead on my forehead. I hope it tastes as good as it looks, I commented, not taking my eyes from the potion. Nurse 2 giggled. I guarantee it, Mr. Daly. She set out a spoon in a small bowl of honey and a carafe of milk for me. Her bracelets clattered and chimed against the serving tray. I read in the Bible they drank milk and honey. I liked the Bible. I figured if it was good enough for the Hebrews, it was good enough for my tea. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Daly, the nurse sang as she took the tray and pushed out of the room. I'll see you for lunch. I poured in the milk and collected 2 healthy spoonfuls of honey from the bowl. I stirred the tea together, smiling as I turned the flour around and around. I pulled the spoon to my mouth and licked it clean, tapping it twice on the mug when I was through. Clink, clink. I put the spoon in the carafe and reclined back with the mug between my hands. As I took the first sip, the 9 o'clock news began. The tea was pleasing, creamy on its own without the milk, but all the creamier for it, and sweet from the honey, but also from the lotus flower. The jasmine tannins sapped the edges and back of my tongue. I took another sip and leaned forward in my chair. The theme music began, sending frissons up and down my spine. I recited along with the television in impeccably rehearsed karaoke, KRBE Channel 2 Action News, a subsidiary of Balk's News Network, home of the crime-stopping queen, Kathy Clark. I grinned, took a healthy gulp of the tea. Its warmth tickled from the top of my throat to the bottom of my stomach. The KRBE logo flashed on the screen, then spun away to show Kathy Clark smiling at the news desk, followed by B-roll footage of the city's skyline, Marty Martinez, the weatherman, police sirens, store robberies, and houses destroyed by wildfires. I finished my tea. It was as good as Nurse 2 promised, maybe better. I tried to make a note to remember her name, but then, as the intro music faded into Kathy Clark holding a stack of papers in her signature red dress, I noticed something was wrong. I couldn't figure it out, but definitely there was something wrong. I leaned in until my face was inches from the screen, furling my brow. I snapped my fingers. "Of course," I exclaimed, sitting back. Kathy usually sat on the right side of the desk, facing left. Today she was sitting on the left side, facing right. I wondered why she changed her routine so suddenly, but now was no time for thinking. Kathy began her sermon as usual. Her eyes scanned down the invisible teleprompter. I loved her voice. It was like innocence in a tin can. Another 50 bodies have been found washed ashore in Lake Erie this weekend. Authorities are still searching for the black box of the plane crash this summer. I ran my fingers down the front of my pajama bottoms. In other news, the presidential inauguration week kicks off today, this marking President Herman's historic 5th term. I loved President Herman almost more than I loved Kathy, and strictly because Kathy told me that President Herman would be tough on the people she told me to hate. Kathy carried on. The APSAC is down 84 points today in a record. She stopped, stared blankly, directly into the camera. Silence filled my room. I stopped fondling myself. I reached with my free hand to slap the TV. I looked into Kathy's eyes. A smile curled around her face. A wrong smile. The corners of her lips curled too far inward. The grin stretched and contorted across her face like deer hide on a tanning rack. Her teeth were caramel-colored, rotting. A serpentine tongue flicked between them. The pupils of her eyes dilated. They grew and grew until their aperture enveloped all of the grey blue in her irises. I pulled away slowly, transfixed. An abyssal voice of static came churning through the television speakers, deep beyond deep, clouded by the smearing of data in decay. "Ronnie," the voice growled. I shook my head, wiped my eyes, took a fist, and knocked on my temple. "Ronnie, baby, it's me. It's your girl, Kathy." I wanted to hide. I tried to push myself through the back of my recliner, tried to bury myself in its orange foam guts. It was Kathy speaking. She stood up from the desk. "We've been watching you, sugar." As she rose, she reached for the small of her back, grabbed the zipper of her dress and pulled it down. The horrible voice cooed, "We love you here at Channel 2, Ronnie baby. You're our #1 fan." She let her dress fall to her ankles, sidestepped out of it. She ran a fingernail down one of her exposed breasts, slicing it open. Blood drained around her nipple as the fatty flesh unfurled itself on either side of the fresh wound. Waves of white cresting a brackish scarlet ocean. She cupped her breast and brought it to her lips, drank heartily until her face and torso were smeared in crimson. "We have a surprise for you, Ronnie baby, Ronnie dear, but it has to be our little secret." She put a finger to her lips and made a shushing sound. She walked across the room on the balls of her feet, wolf-like. The camera followed her to the green weather room. Blood pooled and dripped behind her as she put one foot in front of the other. Step, step. Marty Martinez, the weatherman, squatted in the dark. His head bobbing inhumanly fast to the left and right, he was wringing his hands, smiling. In the center of the room, a man in a bathrobe stood on a stool, his back to the camera. The green screen flickered on, black and white footage of soldiers in dark clothes and high boots walking in file like geese. "Remember your friends, Ronnie baby? Why don't you turn around and tell our guest what you think?" I watched in awe. The man on the stool turned slowly. I watched the familiar figure carefully, recognized the greasy hair, the two long earlobes. I jumped to my feet. It was me, the man in the Channel 2 studio. "It's me!" I shouted. My body quaked, my knees knocked together, and I fell back into my chair. Kathy wrapped her arms around my waist, reached down the front of my pants, felt for my cock. The Ron in the studio sobbed. "Ronnie baby, I think it's time for your show." Her arm tensed in my pants, digging her nails into my pelvis. Both Rons screamed. She yanked hard. Marty cackled in the background. She pulled the bloody pulp out and displayed it to the cameras with her wrong grin, held the dangling mess to her lips like a vine of grapes, then swallowed it whole. She smiled and brought her hands above her head, clapped twice. A noose fell down from the ceiling, dangled to and fro. A man on the weather screen was screaming about a chosen race. Whole throngs were being marched into bonfires, poked and prodded by devils with pitchforks and curly tails. "Ronnie, sugar, this is all for you." She threw her head back and laughed. Her Adam's apple tensed in her throat. A nightmarish cacophony of sound rang through the screen, like children screaming over dog whistles, like trains barreling over tracks made of bone. TV Ron pulled the noose over his neck. Kathy made a theatrical bowing motion, the kind a jester gives to a king, sweeping her arm in front of her, crossing her feet. Without standing, she reached and yanked the stool from under him. I scrambled for the remote and shut off the TV. I wet myself, lost control of my legs, bringing them into my chest and kicking them out again. I writhed back and forth in my recliner, my hands tugging at my hair. "Nurse!" I cried. "Nurse, please!" I kicked and howled. 2 men nurses burst in the door, kicking over books. "What is it, Mr. Daly?" one of them shouted. The other moved across the room, threw open the blinds. The sunlight poured in on my face. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me. "Tell us what's wrong, Mr. Daly." I sobbed. "The TV, the news, the Channel 2 news. They killed me." The nurses looked at each other. The first one spoke. "But Mr. Daly, you're right here." "No, I'm dead. Didn't you see? I'm dead." "Mr. Daly, please." He shook me. The other loaded a sedative. "We were just watching the news in the common room. None of us saw anything of the sort. You are alive, Mr. Daly. You're here with us." The other nurse grabbed my bicep and plunged a syringe inside. I felt the opiate wash over me, over my mind. I looked up at the men nurses. "You mean it wasn't really what I thought it was on the TV, I mean?" The nurses were restacking my books. They toppled. They shook their heads. "No, Mr. Daly, we don't know what you saw. Why don't you just relax? Cherie will be in with your lunch in a couple hours." With that, they left the room. I waited until their footsteps disappeared in the hall. My hands still trembled. I covered my face. My voice wept into the room. I saw today. I saw it on the news. I saw her doing something some people said she didn't do, and since some folks saw something else, I couldn't say who really knew. No one seemed to know. No one knew anything anymore. This was a time for that. The annihilation of truth. For bailing out the waters, floating the ship of the mind, capsizing it, plunging the sails into the sea, soaking them in the blood of fallen titans and the eggs of the shark and the protozoa which scrape the floor of places unseen. The Piscine dimension, that is the home of the mind. It is where it was first grown, eons ago. It belongs there, drowned, so drown it. Let the ostrich bury its head. It cannot fly. It was never free to begin with. Better to never see again than to have the input conflicted. I grabbed the spoon I had been stirring my tea with. I licked its back, still warm, still tasting of honey. I sucked on the spoon until all I could taste was the silver, pulled it from my mouth, tapped twice on the rim of the mug. Clink, clink. Then I brought the spoon to my left eye. I saw. With my left hand, I pulled down my eyelid, still grasping the spoon in my right. I rested the edge of it on my eye's waterline, still warm from the tea and the sucking. I saw. I pressed in. Blood squirted from my tear duct, pooled in the spoon, mixed with my tears, and dripped down on my pants. More blood caught the corners of my mouth as I grimaced through clenched jaw and clamped teeth. I saw. I pressed the spoon deeper into my socket, kept pressing until I felt it catch the bottom of my sphenoid. Then I scooped. Like ice cream, I thought. I smiled. I liked ice cream. I thought of moose tracks and mint chips as my fingers held open my remaining eye. Story 2. Might as well introduce myself as we're sharing a table. "Gillian," I said simply with a small smile, summoning the courage to look in Archie's direction. "Would you mind too much just watching my tea things while I pop to the washroom?" I said suddenly, catching myself off guard and questioning why all of a sudden I felt I must check my hair and makeup. "Of course not. I'll mind your book for you too." In the ladies' washroom, I stared at my reflection in the brightly lit mirror, touched my hair, smoothing it where it frizzed a little, and reapplied my lipstick. Then, unexpectedly, and for no reason that I could immediately admit to, I found myself tugging at my wedding ring, which I then carefully secreted in the inside pocket of my bag. I regarded myself. What on earth am I doing? I'm 53, not 18. Before I could dwell on it, another woman entered, taking a place at the mirror, and I hurriedly gathered my things together and returned to my table where Archie sat sipping his coffee. Thank you for saving my spot, I said. Not a problem. Archie put down his now empty cup. I see you're reading Aikman, a good choice. Oh, you like him? I've just read a couple of his short stories as part of my degree. I love the bizarre and weird stuff that he comes up with. Exactly. I've probably read this book at least 5 times. I just love the ambiguity, the feeling of unease. I don't know why I like that. It's just a great way to escape from real life for a while. It's almost prosaic horror in a way. There's a line from The View I've always loved. Something like, Archie spoke softly. Thought and feeling had stopped and they were immortal. The moment was immortal. A silent interlude hung over the little formica table. I gasped inwardly. How on earth could he have known that? Archie watched me intently, gauging my reaction. I felt my self-consciousness prickle, hot in my face again. Stunned by his words, I dared not ask how he'd known. So, what is it you're studying? I said, briskly changing the subject. English literature and philosophy, my final year. Archie grinned, toying with his empty coffee cup. I should really be working on my dissertation this morning, but, well, here I am, talking to you. He put the cup down and glanced at his watch. I hope you don't think it presumptuous of me, but it doesn't look like the person I was meeting is going to show up. So how about I tag along with you to Hopkins and Black? Now what do I do? Why would he want to? What if... I picked up my book, my fingers briefly touching Archie's as he pushed his cup aside. I glanced away, gaining seconds to compose my response. But before I could think of a reason to decline, I found myself saying, I can't think why you'd want to spend any more time with me, honestly, but I would enjoy the company. Don't put yourself down, said Archie, appearing wiser than his years. You strike me as someone who'd be lovely company. He got up from his seat and moved around to pull out my chair. Now come on, let's go and look at some books. I found myself leading the way out of the cafe, oblivious to the whispers and turned heads, conscious only of the good-looking young man following closely behind. Hopkins and Black was the sort of bookshop that would not have been out of place in Victorian times, with its darkly painted frontage and name in flowing gold script above the window. As we entered, I felt immediately at ease as the familiar scent of musty books, mingled with a faint hint of mildew, welcomed me. The dark old bookshelves and their dusty contents softened reality, creating a sanctuary where I could become gloriously lost for a while. I felt myself exhale as though I'd been holding my breath for far too long, and a small smile crept across my lips as we meandered through the dimly lit avenues of books. Was there anything that you were looking for particularly? Archie asked as we made our way up the wooden staircase to the fiction section. It would be nice to find a really special first edition, maybe something by Blackwood, Aikman, or Lovecraft even, I said, surprised at how naturally the words came. With Archie, I could be myself, bookish, eccentric even. It was so much easier than talking to Mike, my football-obsessed husband of 28 years. Well, you never know, said Archie, jogging up the stairs to my side as we reached the first-floor landing. Perhaps today will be your lucky day. The warmth in his tone made my chest tighten in a way I'd forgotten could be possible. His eyes lingered on mine for a fleeting moment, and I felt a flush returning to my cheeks. I turned away to the nearest shelf, brushing my fingers lightly over the spines of the books, unsure whether I wanted Archie to notice my blushes or not. As I browsed the darkened shelves, a surreal feeling passed over me, as if the dust motes and particles of stale air released from pages of aged books had cast a spell. In the dim corners of Hopkins and Black, I felt oddly alive, as though I were in a film. This isn't real life. But just for this moment it is, I thought before turning suddenly as Archie tapped me gently on the shoulder. Have a look at this, he said, holding out a book of Blackwood stories. It's not a first edition, but it's a nice old copy. For a moment I stared at him, words caught in my throat, rocked by the peculiar sensation. This sort of thing doesn't happen to me. It's lovely, I said quietly, taken aback by the young man's thoughtfulness, that he'd listened to me, searched for something he knew I'd like. "Thank you," I whispered, and then, compelled by something that had been absent for too long, I put a trembling hand to his cheek, unable to pull it away. Before I had thought any longer, Archie covered my hand with his eyes catching mine in the dim light. Too close, too intense. My breath caught as I battled with guilt, passion, confusion, and then, as control escaped me, I leaned in, the warmth of his breath on my face, and for a fleeting second, our lips touched. What am I doing? What am I doing? My mind broke loose and I jerked back, slamming into the bookshelves behind me. "No, I mustn't," I breathed. "I'm so sorry." And I fled, stumbling down the stairs and out of the door into the street, where I ran, away from the shop, from Archie, and from myself. I looked at my faint reflection in the train window, the ghost of a woman who just an hour ago had been sensuous, enthralling, a woman with a new place in the world. You stupid, stupid woman. I wiped my eye with the back of my hand, quashing the tear that threatened me with the truth. "You've made a fool of yourself. How could you be so ridiculous?" And then, remembering, I hastily reached into my bag and pushed the gold band back onto my finger, where it belongs, I thought sadly. At home, I fidgeted and mooched, made the evening meal and ate in silence. I stared blankly at the wall while Mike watched television, then welled up with guilt as I looked at him, smiling to himself as he watched one of his favorite shows. He's done nothing wrong. None of this is Mike's fault. The following day, I forced myself into jobs around the house. This is where you belong. This is what you do. Give your head a shake, you silly thing. I chastised myself as I folded the laundry, then administered myself with a proverbial 40 lashes as I relentlessly scrubbed the bathroom. When I'd finished, I refused myself the comfort of reading, something I would normally enjoy in the afternoon, telling myself, "You don't deserve it." As the following days dragged by, mundane and predictable, I continued to punish myself, finding more chores, even Mike remarking at how much I was doing, but by the following week I could stand it no longer. Unsure whether it was a form of closure I was seeking, or perhaps a chance to revisit the woman I'd momentarily become, I boarded the train into the city, and with carefully styled hair and makeup, wearing my most flattering coat, I retraced my steps. At the cafe, I was relieved to find the corner table free, and I sat, fiddling with my teacup, the familiar Formica glancing hopefully towards the door. What makes you think he's going to be here again? I asked myself, feeling foolish for returning. Maybe I should go to the bookshop. He might be there, I rationalized, desperately trying to convince myself, though my conflict had me frozen in time, not knowing what to do or where to go. And then, as reality began to set in, and my tea had gone completely cold, my heart lurched as my eyes fell upon the blonde hair and recognizable stance of Archie outside the cafe window. Oh my God, he's here. I began to tremble, unable to control my rising emotion. Everything I'd felt and quashed from the previous week came flooding back, hitting me with the force of a great wave. I took a deep breath, watching the door, a smile ready. And then, there he was, still outside, greeting an auburn-haired young woman. He said something. She laughed and looked up at him. He reached, and holding her face in his hands, kissed her fully on the mouth. Their heads remained close as she tucked her arm comfortably in his, and they started to walk away together. No, no, no. Horror and dismay slapped me forcefully across the face. I grasped the sides of the table as though I might fall at any moment. My chest tightened, a sickening sense of reality rising within me. I sat motionless, watching from my lonely place in the corner as the young couple disappeared out of sight. And there I remained with my cold cup of tea, until the man from behind the counter came and took it away, and I picked up my bag and left. On the train, I stared out of the window, not seeing the countryside as it sped past, holding on to my resolve to just get home, where I could let the makeup run down my face and allow myself to fall apart. My mind flipped from one emotion to the next. How could you be so ridiculous to think that someone like Archie would come looking for you? I gulped back a sob. She was so beautiful. Not here, not on the train. Pull yourself together. Act your age. But it was too much. And as the guard checked my ticket and asked if I was okay, my face crumpled and I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket, sobbing quietly into it until the train reached my stop. The house was quiet, and I was grateful that Mike was still at work. I hung up my coat and entered the living room where I faced the mirror above the fireplace, reflecting back my swollen eyes and tear-stained face. Better get cleaned up before Mike gets home, you silly, silly girl. And as I turned back towards the room, the sunlight filtering through the net curtains, something on the side table caught my eye. I stepped closer, the familiarity of my living room suddenly feeling alien to me. Do I even belong here? And then my breath caught as I recognized the book's cover, a hardback Aikman first edition. With trembling hands, I carefully picked it up as though it might disappear if I touched it. Part of a dream, perhaps. But the book was real. It was a book I'd hoped to find at Hopkins and Black, and it was here in my living room. I tentatively opened the cover, revealing a piece of paper with a handwritten note tucked behind the dust jacket. Saw this in town and thought of you. I hope it's the right one. Love, Mike X. I stood motionless as I stared at the note, reading the words again. My throat tightened, my whole world shook, and as my knees weakened, I lowered myself onto the sofa, clutching the book to my chest. That evening, the book in my lap, I sat on the sofa, my hand resting on Mike's. I felt warm inside as I regarded him, enjoying the television show he was watching. He noticed me looking at him and smiled, nodded, acknowledging how much the book meant to me. He was glad it had made me happy. Then he squeezed my hand and turned his attention back to the television, content in the small world we inhabited together. I slid my hand back across the sofa and turned my attention to the book, a first edition of Dark Entries. I still couldn't believe that Mike had even known it was something I'd like, never mind buy me a copy. I thumbed through the pages, enjoying the weight of the book in my hand, planning to only read this copy now and again to preserve its condition. I was about to close it to go and make a cup of tea when I noticed faint markings inside the front cover. Holding it to the light, I could see where a message in pencil had been written and then erased. Must have been a gift to someone else once. I smiled as I tried to read what the short message said, straining my eyes. In a well-executed hand, I made it out. Thought and feeling had stopped, and they were immortal. The moment was immortal. My breath caught, my hands trembling once more. I glanced across at my husband, happily absorbed in the television. In the dim reflection of its glass, I caught a glimpse of my face, a flicker of someone else, somewhere else, and then it was gone. My fingers traced the outline of the words, knowing they would only ever be visible to me. Then I closed the book and went to make a cup of tea. Story 3. I'm so angry. I did my best, I really did. That road from the army base where we live now, running out west towards that looted Costco outlet near Corvallis, is littered with abandoned cars and trucks, all rusting out, tires flat, gas tank lids and caps open. I know all the places where you have to go off-road to get around them, but there are always things you just can't predict. The law of unintended consequences, they call it. That's what happened to me, I guess. I became an unintended consequence, I don't know. Maybe that's not right, I'm not thinking very clearly right now. Molly too, my Staffordshire Terrier. She was an unintended consequence as well, maybe. I guess. I felt worse about her in the end, honestly. I loved Molly so much. Those little fuckers. I hate them so much, and now I am them. The old Toyota 4Runner was running pretty smooth, despite the degraded quality of the fuel that was left to us, and it only bogged down on me a few times during the drive but never stalled out. When I reached the parking lot, I came to a stop by the loading docks, like always. I grabbed the cut-down Remington 12-gauge and stuffed the box of pumpkin balls into my jacket pocket. Normally I would have left the driver's side door open, but I had to keep Molly inside. I certainly wasn't bringing her in there. The rear door to the Costco was still propped open, just like it always is, and I found the battered old orange hand truck sitting right there in the corner, just like it always is. Things looked much as they always did. I couldn't hear anything, but I still kept the shotgun pointed directly ahead of me as I entered the store floor from the back room. I clicked on the small flashlight mounted to the barrel with some electrical tape and squinted into the darkness. I waited 15 seconds, then another 15, and then I entered. I left the hand truck right there and proceeded very slowly. It was my turn to do this today, and I never argued against it when my turn came. But Kaylee was my only remaining child, and I had to get back to her. I was in no big rush. I simply had to do my job and get back. I'm just so angry now. I really messed this up. I took a can of baked beans off the closest shelf and threw it as far as I could down one of the aisles, and then I shuffled back a few steps to see what would happen, listening for the sound of footsteps, ready to run if there were too many. I heard nothing. I waited 15 seconds, then another 15, and then I moved forward. A short time later, I had the first load of supplies stacked up on the hand truck. I left it there and checked the back room again with the flashlight beam on my shotgun, and then checked the back parking lot for a moment just to make sure everything was cool out there too. Seeing nothing of concern, I hauled the first load of supplies out and loaded them into the back of the 4Runner as quietly as possible. When I returned, I took all of the same precautions. I made no assumptions. But again, everything seemed clear, so I went ahead and gathered up the rest of the supplies. In the end, I had canned foods, batteries, bottled water and juice, toilet paper, napkins, Tylenol, garbage bags, t-shirts, vitamins and a few other things. There wasn't very much left at that Costco by that point, but we didn't go much further into the more previously populated urban areas until it became truly necessary. Again, I checked the back room and the parking lot before I hauled the hand truck out through the loading dock door and placed everything in the back of the old Toyota SUV as quietly as possible. Then I heard the sound of something being knocked over coming through the rear door of the Costco outlet. It sounded metallic, maybe a bucket or a garbage pail being tipped over or something like that. I pointed my shotgun in that direction for a second and then jumped into the driver's seat of the Toyota and drove off. I had what I came for, and Molly was barking like crazy. It would take at least 5 or 6 hours, maybe more, to get back to the base, and I had already traveled at least that same amount of time just getting there earlier that day. I would definitely have to refuel from the tanks in the back soon. I was ready to push on through, but when it started raining, I knew it would take much longer, and it would be much more dangerous. I had to rethink my plans. I knew a place. It was more important that I just got back to Kaylee than getting back right away. I knew she would be scared if I didn't return that night, but that's obviously better than not returning at all. My sister Amy would comfort her as much as possible. I wasn't looking forward to my night either, but Amy would take care of her until I got there with the supplies. Like I said, I knew a place. It was just past a highway exit sign for Langhorne Avenue. That sign has a red letter X spray painted across it. Everyone knows what that means. Just past that exit, along the side of the road just before you reach Redmond, there is a little sleep spot we sometimes use when we have to. It has proven safe. It used to be a small electrical substation, just a little 8 by 12 steel structure about 10 feet tall that once housed some power transmission equipment. At some point someone gutted it out, and you can still see the old components rusting there just outside of the door, the tall grass growing up through the cracks. I pulled the Toyota around in front of that old substation, but I kept the engine running, and I stayed inside for a little while and used my binoculars to search the surrounding area for signs of movement. The sky was grey and the sun was setting, but I saw nothing of concern, so eventually I grabbed the shotgun and my travel bag and got out of the SUV as cautiously and quietly as possible. I left the driver's side door open, despite the light rain. I didn't want to make any unnecessary noise, and if I needed to make a quick escape, that could make the difference. Once Molly and I were inside that old substation, I quickly closed the door behind me and dropped the zip-tie bundled rebar bolts into place. Then I stood there by the door for a while holding my shotgun, but I didn't hear anything outside, and eventually I relaxed a bit. They don't like the rain, but you never really know. The filthy old mattress was a welcome sight. I sat there as I ate a cold can of Chef Boyardee raviolis. They were so delicious and I took my time. It was a treat. I had dog food and water for Molly too. She was happy as well. Afterwards, I laid my sleeping bag out on the mattress, and Molly and I fell asleep to the fading sound of rain pattering off the steel roof. It was nice. A few hours later, I was awoken by the sound of Molly's growling and barking. She was standing by the door and I could hear the sounds of screaming and scratching coming from the other side. I grabbed my shotgun and pulled Molly back, breathing heavily, hoping the door would hold. I checked the rebar bolts. The door seemed solid. After a while, the rain picked up, the violent sounds coming from outside faded away, and then I set the shotgun down and returned to the bed. It was hard to find sleep again. I stared up into the darkness for a while. It was just over 3 years ago when it all began. A facility in the woods of northern Montana, where they housed and performed tests on children who had been exposed to experimental biochemical weapons in various locations around the world. Things were fine there until they were not. The confused and sometimes conflicting news reports at the time mostly said that there was an antivirus that was administered to those kids on a daily basis, but one day the supplies ran out. Then, by the next morning, that facility was overrun, blood and gore. The fences went down. But what no one knew until then was that it was contagious. Most people past the age of adolescence quickly succumbed to it, but not everyone. No one really knows why. It all happened very quickly. And then it was all over. And I mean all of it. Everything. The world is very different now. This part of the world anyway. I really don't know what it's like elsewhere. We don't receive news reports anymore. I eventually fell asleep and woke up a few hours later with Molly cuddled up by my side. I fed her some kibble for breakfast, and then I ate a granola bar and drank a bottle of water and packed up my gear. I looked out through the 2 small peepholes before leaving the safety of the substation with Molly by my side. The rain had stopped, but it was still grey and cloudy. I guess I made a little too much noise unbolting and opening the door. As soon as we stepped outside, I heard the clattering from behind the substation and on the low rooftop overhead. They must have just waited out there all night. I didn't know they were capable of that. I thought they just retreated back into the woods once they quit the hunt. Molly paid the price, not me. I hate myself for that. I hate myself. When they pounced, I fired my shotgun twice and blasted 2 of them in the chest and put them down. Both teenage boys, stark naked and filthy, with elongated nails and teeth, long, straggly hair, moving with predatory speed. Unfortunately, there were 3 more who fell on Molly, 2 adults and a kid. I was about to take another shot, but they were all over her, and trust me, she was fighting back like a fucking monster, but I just saw no way to not hit her as well. After a few seconds, I realized she would soon be dead anyway, so I just unloaded my remaining 4 shells and killed them all, including Molly. I was so angry, but I started crying right away. I'm still enraged. They made me kill Molly, those little fuckers. As I was making my way to the driver's side door of the Toyota, with my head down and staring at the grass through my tear-blurred vision, that's when the last one got me. He was just a little kid, maybe 10 years old. Perhaps that's why he held back when the others rushed in. I don't know. Who can say? Who knows how they think? I guess I will know soon enough. It's already starting. He came around from the back of the lift gate and dove at me and bit me on my forearm. There was only the one quick bite before I turned around and smashed him in the forehead with the butt of my Remington. But as soon as I got into the 4Runner and closed the door, I could see that he had drawn blood. I wiped it off with my bandana and poured some rubbing alcohol on it. I was scared, but I still had some hope. I had my fingers crossed, but I still had some hope. That hope faded quickly along the drive back to the base. I feel sick now. I feel very sick, and it's just getting worse. My head is starting to pound, and I feel like I might need to vomit. My teeth and gums and my fingernails and toenails are all starting to ache. My vision is changing and my throat is dry. I'm starting to make some involuntary growling sounds, and I cannot stop gripping the steering wheel with all of the strength in my hands. I want to just get out of the Toyota and run. It doesn't even matter where. I was planning to just drop off these supplies by the front gates of the base and then leave, but it's still at least a 2-hour drive, and I'm afraid of who or what I will be by the time I get there. I think I have to just turn around right now and drive in the opposite direction for as long as I possibly can. I have reloaded the Remington, and I am keeping it handy. I am sweating and drooling pretty hard now, I can't help it. My clothes are also starting to feel extremely uncomfortable. I think I might need to pull over and remove my shirt and boots soon. Maybe my jeans too. I don't think I can take this too much longer. I keep looking at the woods along the side of the road. I just want to run off into the trees. I want to scream. I want to eat something while it is still breathing. Mostly, I just want to end this before it gets worse. I know that I will never see Kaylee again, and even more than what happened to Molly, that's what makes me feel so sick. I'm sure my sister Amy will take good care of her. But still, I just feel so sick. I keep looking at the woods and at the Remington. I just have to keep driving for a little bit longer now. The radio stations all went dark years ago, and there's only one stupid old CD stuck inside the dashboard stereo in this Toyota for me to listen to as I drive. The Marshall Tucker Band, so I turn it up. What else am I going to do? The hum of the motor is hurting my head, and the lyrics seem right. I'm going to find me a hole in the wall. I'm going to crawl inside and die. But no, I don't think so. That would be too easy. I think I'm going to die with my boots on, and I'm definitely going to bring some of you little bastards with me. Get ready to eat some of these 12-gauge pumpkin balls. It's not going to be pretty. I'm going to cut some of you little demons in half while I still can, as many of you as possible, until my ammo runs out. I owe that much to Kaylee and Molly and Amy and all of the others. I see a red letter X spray painted on the exit sign up ahead. I'll be there soon. You'll know when I arrive, you little fuckers. Trust me, you'll know. Story 4. I stepped into my kitchen, the scent of the candle I had lit wrapped around me like a hug. After a few hours, the aroma of my cooking still filled the air. I glanced at the clock on the stove and noticed it was 9 at night. My day had slipped past me like a running river. With a smile, I reached for my tea bags, longing for a cup to warm my body and soothe my throat. My fingers brushed against different flavors, neatly organized in a clear tea bucket. My hand stopped on the chamomile. I grabbed the mug my late father had given me. My name was elegantly decorated on it with gold and blue, my two favorite colors. The cup reminded me of the many times I would share a cup of tea with my father, expressing love and laughter in our kitchen. As I filled my kettle and set it on the stove to heat up, I glanced out of the window and noticed it was raining as chills ran over my body. Raindrops danced on the window, creating a soothing background. Once the kettle started screaming, I took it off the stove to pour the hot water into my mug onto my tea bag. I watched as the water turned a rich amber hue. I drizzled honey into my mug as I stirred the tea. I lifted my cup to my lips when a sudden thunderous knock on the door startled me, causing me to burn my lip on the tea. Confusion washed over me as I glanced at my front door. Who could be pounding on my door at this time of night? I thought to myself. I slowly walked over to the front door, taking a deep breath as I switched on my porch light and opened the door. The porch light illuminated the small area around the house as I stepped out just enough to avoid getting wet. No one was at the door as I scanned the darkness to see if pranksters were lurking behind the trees. The wind whipped through my hair, causing it to blow in my face. As I was about to step back into my house, a shadowy figure caught my eye lurking beside a tree in my front yard. The fading light of the moon lit up just enough for me to see that it was a person, but not who it was. "Who is there?" I called out as my voice trembled. I could feel a knot in my stomach as fear washed over me. The figure remained still and unresponsive. Chill bumps formed on my arms and my arm hairs rose. Was this an intruder? I thought as my mind raced with wild possibilities, each one very terrifying to the core. "I will call the police if you don't leave my property. You have no right to be here," I shouted as my heart raced. I could feel each beat in my throat as I swallowed. In an instant, a piercing scream echoed from the figure, a sound so terrifying that it jolted my soul. A womanly figure dashed toward me. I let out a scream and quickly slammed the door shut as my fingers trembled on the lock. I was able to secure the door just in time to keep the lady out. A loud knock echoed on the door, causing me to stumble and fall on my butt. I scooted closer to the door, pressing my back against the cool of the door. My heart was pounding so fast, I put my hand over my chest. Adrenaline was rushing through my veins as the panic set in, causing me to breathe heavily. What was going on? The question looped around over and over in my mind. Who was that woman? I thought to myself as I thought about the woman's terrifying face. The woman had piercing eyes and a pale complexion with scars all over her face. I glanced around the room, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. I rose to my feet, grabbed a kitchen knife off the counter and then ran back over to the door. My hand shook as I fumbled with the lock. With a desperate twist, I was able to unlock the knob and twist the door open. The porch light was still on from earlier. The rain continued to pour down. I peered out into the stormy night and noticed no one was there. The streets were deserted. To my surprise, the woman was no longer there, as if she had vanished into thin air. I took a deep breath and closed the door behind me. Perhaps it was just my imagination. The thought danced around in my mind. I placed the knife back on the counter and walked back over to my mug. A sigh escaped my lips as I noticed my tea had turned cold. I poured the cold tea into the sink and threw away the used tea bag. I set the kettle back on the stove to heat up once more. While I waited for the kettle, I cleaned the counter and organized the cookbooks that were sitting next to my stove. Moments later, the kettle came to a boil, causing a scream. I quickly took it off the stove and poured the water over my new tea bag. I picked up my mug and glanced out of my kitchen window once more to make sure the woman wasn't outside. I turned and made my way into the living room. I switched on the TV and began scrolling until I got to the cartoon channel. Happy and animated characters danced across the screen as I tried to erase the lady's face from my mind. I hoped that watching the show would ease my fear and calm my nerves. I found myself laughing softly as I watched the characters on my TV. The following morning, the sweet sound of the birds woke me from my sleep. The sunlight beamed through the curtains, reflecting on my living room table and mug. I didn't realize I had fallen asleep as I rubbed the gunk from my eyes, trying to fully wake up. With a sigh, I reached for my mug, rose to my feet, and made my way into the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, I turned on the sink to wash my mug. The image of the lady's face flashed back into my mind. I had hoped it was just my imagination. After I had washed the mug, I set it on the dry rack and made my way up the steps to shower and get ready for the day. I picked out my outfit for the day and headed to the bathroom for a nice shower. placing my clothes on the side of the sink, a big oversized sweater with a pair of jeans, and turned on the shower so I could warm up the water. When the water reached the perfect temperature, I stepped in as the water poured down on me. The steam began to rise as the water calmed my nerves and warmed my body. I reached for the shampoo and poured some into my hand to lather my hair. The scent of lavender filled the air as I rubbed the soap into my hair. Suddenly the lights began to flicker. I paused for a moment and peeked behind the curtain, but there was no one tampering with the lights. I shrugged as I leaned back under the water to rinse the shampoo from my hair. I paused for a moment as the sound of children's laughter filled my ears. The water streamed down my face. The soap blurred my vision. I rinsed the soap out of my eyes. I slowly glanced around the edge of the curtain as I searched for signs of anyone in my bathroom. My heart started racing in my chest. The overhead light started flickering, causing panic to set in as I quickly rinsed my hair. Once I had finished, I shut the water off. The bathroom was suddenly silent. The warmth of the shower stayed in the air and embraced me. With courage, I opened the shower curtain, and a rush of cold air hit me in the face. I quickly snatched my towel and wrapped it around my body. As I stepped out of the tub, my bare, wet feet met the soft, fuzzy bathroom mat beneath me. A confused look crossed my face as I noticed the bathroom door was cracked open. I was certain I had closed it before I stepped into the tub. The house was eerily silent, except for the sound of water droplets falling from the shower faucet. I pushed the door open wider and glanced down the hallway. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response. Maybe I was just talking to myself, but my mind raced with questions. What if someone had been in my house? Were they still here? I walked down the hallway, still wrapped in my towel, leaving my clothes behind in the bathroom, a small trail of water following me as I walked. I opened my bedroom door and glanced around. The bedside lamp cast a glow across the room, which confused me because I remembered turning it off before I headed to the bathroom. My eyes darted toward the closet door. I approached it cautiously and opened it, my heart racing and my breath coming in short gasps. But to my surprise, no one was there. I turned back to the bedroom door, my face still twisted in confusion. Could it have been the woman from last night? Was she real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I thought to myself. The grief over my father's death could be affecting me more than I realized. I made my way back to the bathroom to finish getting ready for the day. Just as I stepped inside, my phone began to ring. I glanced at the screen and smiled when I saw it was my boyfriend calling. "Hello, my love," I answered cheerfully as I slipped on my pants. "Are you on your way?" he asked, his voice crackling through the speaker. "Yes, I'm getting dressed now. Just got out of the shower," I replied, slipping my shirt over my head. After a few moments, I ended the call. I took a minute to gather my thoughts. The thought of telling my boyfriend about what had happened raced through my mind. What if he thought I was crazy? I looked at myself in the mirror after I finished getting dressed. I brushed my brown hair and applied some makeup, trying to push the nagging thoughts aside. As I drove to my boyfriend's house, I found myself stopped at a traffic light. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the streets empty as everyone was still in bed. While waiting at the light, I glanced to my right and froze. There she was again, the same woman from last night standing by my passenger door. My heart raced, and before I could even react, she screamed and pounded on my window. Panic surged through me as I screamed and floored the gas, speeding away. Who was that woman, and why was she following me? My thoughts swirled in a dizzying spiral. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my pulse hammering in my chest as I raced to my boyfriend's house. Once I arrived, I gathered my things and walked to his front door, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't ready to share what had been happening with him. As I pushed the door open, I was met with a playful "boo" from Sebastian, who had clearly been trying to scare me. I screamed and threw my purse and phone onto the floor in surprise. He pulled me into a hug, laughing at the expression on my face. "You should have seen your face," he chuckled, kissing my forehead. "You know I get scared easily, Sebastian," I muttered, burying my face in his chest. He helped me pick up my things and we made our way to the living room where his dog, an Akita Pit, ran over to greet me with playful energy. As I sat on the couch, the dog jumped up next to me, licking my arm. I smiled, petting the dog as I tried to shake off the unsettling thoughts. Sebastian approached, holding an envelope in his hands. He handed it to me, his expression serious. "What is this?" I asked, confused, as I unfolded the envelope and pulled the letter from inside. "He asked me to give it to you after he died. I never opened it," he replied, sitting down next to me as the dog bounced between us, licking my arm and his. I stared at the letter in my hands, feeling a strange tension building in the pit of my stomach. I began to read it out loud. "My dearest daughter," I read, my voice trembling. Sebastian scooted closer, and the dog, eager for attention, jumped off the couch, oblivious to the growing tension. I continued reading. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. I want you to know how much I love you. No words can express my deepest love for you, my baby girl. I wish I was there to guide you through the challenges life has given you. I need to express my deepest apology for what I'm about to tell you. Our family is under a curse. You must take the life of the one you love. My great-great-grandfather killed her son and she cursed us. I let you live so you can be the one to break the curse." As I finished reading, I was startled by the witch's laughter filling the room. I turned quickly, and there she was, standing before me, laughing maniacally. The sound of her laughter grew louder as she ran into the kitchen, and Sebastian followed, unaware of what was happening. "You're hallucinating again," he said, sounding concerned. "Please take your medication. I've been trying to get you to take it for the past hour." The words barely registered as I seized the kitchen knife, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I turned to face Sebastian, the horror crashing over me in waves. In one swift motion, I plunged the knife into his throat. Blood poured from his wound, and his hands gripped at his neck in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. I screamed in horror, the world spinning as I fell to my knees. The witch, the letter, none of it had been real. There was no curse. There was no letter. It was all a figment of my imagination, and the paper I had been holding was my prescription. Panic flooded my mind as I stared at Sebastian's lifeless body. What was I supposed to do now? A flash of an idea struck me, and I grabbed his body, dragging him to the living room rug we had bought together. I wrapped him tightly in the rug so he wouldn't fall out as I pulled him into his backyard. I soaked both him and the rug with lighter fluid and set them on fire, the flames roaring to life as I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. At least his neighbors were away on vacation. I turned quickly and ran back inside, grabbing bleach to clean the blood. I scrubbed every inch of the floor, my hands trembling as I tried to erase all evidence of what I had done. Once I finished, I stepped outside with his clothes and photographs, my breath shallow. I tossed them into the flames, one by one, my hands shaking as I watched each photo burn. The crackling of the paper echoed in my ears, and with every piece that turned to ash, I felt a piece of myself fall apart.